You've spent the last year or so doing roadshow screenings of your film. What has surprised you about the reaction to your sci-fi twist on a matriarchal galaxy?
Um, what has surprised me? The fact that men love it, the fact that men laugh, a film where I'm supposedly making fun of men and everybody was always afraid that I was going to insult men. Men have actually been my best audiences. I mean, women, let me not mitigate the experience of women at this film, but that's the surprise. I expected women to connect to it. Women do connect to it. It's been an amazing experience with women because women sometimes cry at the end of the movie. Sometimes, when we have the Q&A, women will say, me too, me too. So in that respect, I didn't expect that, from women. I didn't expect that sort of emotional reaction. I didn't expect that extraordinary connection that I've received. But the men surprised me, I think, the most because I remember like meeting a couple in an elevator in Toronto, and I looked at the wife and I said, there's a movie that's screening and it's mine. And I want you guys to come. And I was just looking at the wife. I'm not looking at the husband, just totally like convinced that she's the one who's going to drag him to the movie. And, she does, in fact, drag him to the movie. And then at the end of the movie, he laughed so hard. He came up to me. He said, that was the funniest movie I've seen in 20 years. And my heart was like, oh.
That's beautiful.
So it's great. The other thing is that people talk at the Q&A. The other big surprise is people talk as you will experience when I come to Chicago. People talk at the Q&A for like hours afterwards. Nobody can ever. It's like I open up like a wide lid, and everyone wants to talk about it. And there have been 2-hour conversations that have dragged on to bars that we visit after the screenings.
Wow.
And I think the most important thing I can say about it is that it's a communal film. It's a film that begs to be watched with a live audience, to see everybody interacting with it in real time. And as great as I love it, online, and I've obviously seen it a million times because I edit it, but to see it live, to see the way that these moments play out on people and then the connectivity of the audience with one another, there's something called communal theater. This is it.
That's great. Now, philosophically, the film and the creation of the galaxy is part of a larger movement by you to adjust thinking and language regarding men, women, interrelationships, and power dynamics. How can this beginning drop of a new thought become a torrent of evolution in your observation?
From a sort of super nerdy intellectual standpoint, I want to begin with the fact that words, and this is part of my larger philosophy, is that you could take a word and it could be either neutral or it could be a weapon. So a word like feminism has been demonized and weaponized. And what happens to a word like feminism? It starts out as equality in the beginning, as a concept that the original concept is women want equal pay, equal rights. But what's happened over time, because men get so insecure by this concept, they demonize it. I remember throughout the decades, I remember being in college and saying things like, I'm not a feminist, because, I didn't want any man to dislike me because I was calling myself a feminist. It became such a scary word. It wasn't until I began to study feminism that I began to understand how misinterpreted it is. And I would go so far as to say that words like femininity, masculinity, narcissism, feminism are words that have been warped over time, have evolved. And now the question becomes, when you come up to someone, are you being defined by the demonization of the word, or are you being defined by what you think you are? So when a woman says, I don't consider myself a feminist, I consider myself feminine, is she actually talking about the definition of feminism, or is she talking about what the word is now carrying over time, like the word becomes historical and then it becomes implanted with all the stuff, and then it becomes fat. The actual word becomes fat. And so what I want to do is I want to try to pull the fat off, get at the essence, understand the actual historical meaning of each word and where it originated from. That's why the study of words, the recalibration of words fascinates me to no end, because once you understand what it really means instead of how it's been used against someone in a conversation, then you can actually decide, do I define myself this way or that way? And but more importantly, this idea of recalibrating language is about taking not just old words, but creating new words, and also infusing positivity and collaborative concepts into words. So the way that I think what makes essentially society fall apart, what makes relationships between men and women fall apart, what makes the gender wars, as we call them, so acrimonious and so and people are at each other's necks, they become antithetical to each other, is because they don't actually know why they are attacking each other, and because the words themselves have acquired this kind of negativity. So even I would even go so far as to say liberal, conservative, what does that really mean? Democrat, Republican, so people have different ideas about it. Obviously, someone calling themselves Republican thinks it's positive. A liberal viewing a Republican is going to think it's negative. So the idea that I want to introduce A, new words, but B, if we look at it from kind of like a futuristic perspective, and we look at ourselves from a futuristic point of view, and we actually want societies to work and to function, we need to begin to create new words that are infused with hope, positivity, collaboration, co-listening, and most vitally, empathy. So without any of that, so words carrying that, so that when we're communicating with one another, right now our positive vocabulary is extremely limited to words like love and gratitude. I mean, we've got to come up with more bridges, so to speak.
The emergence of your film is concurrent with your personal emergence as you expand your possibilities during a life transition. Beyond Galaxy 360, what other plans do you have to place your footprint on the media landscape, especially in relationship to your philosophy?
Oh, God, what am I not planning? I mean, what field am I not entering? What world am I not thinking about? There are books that I'm working on, excellent titles I've come up with, screenplays that I'm going to put into production. But right now, in this present little moment, in this moment in time, in our little, past, future, present, right? Looking at it from the future perspective, I've got something called Portal 2195. It is birthed from Galaxy 360. So just to give people context, Galaxy 360 takes place in 2195, where women rule the galaxy and the planet, have positions of power, and men essentially compete in male beauty pageants. And Portal 2195 essentially arose because I started to think about, this movie was really cool, but if I create an entire universe of beings who live in this world that I'm thinking about, and while Galaxy's comedic and it's a satire, and it's meant to be a kind of comedic, creative, satirical view of our current culture, Portal 2195 is a futuristic, utopian perspective of humanity. And it takes the future and it tells us, like, in what if, just what if the future is not evil, it's not dystopian, it's not gray, it's not brown, and maybe it's pink, maybe it's purple, maybe it's yellow, maybe we're happy, maybe we have, connections, real connections with one another, maybe we're grateful to each other, maybe we listen to each other. Imagine a future like that. Now let's take that imaginative utopia, bring it down to earth and think about how we can kind of like purge earth of its current problems, but also start to collaborate with one another to create this brighter future. So that instead of just constantly talking about what's wrong with our humanity, and there's a lot to say on that, also trying to think about solutions. I'm all about solutions. I'm all about solving the problem as quickly as possible. And this is not going to be a quick solve, obviously, but Portal 2195 has essentially become a podcast. And at first I just did it as like me in a sauna, you know, hey guys, I'm in Portal 2195, sweating my ass off. You know, these are my little nuggets of truth. And we got 100,000 views in the first 5 days of launching those clips. So then people were like, well, you should just do a podcast. And I started interviewing people. Nice. And I had a couple of interviews. I had a couple of wonderful, wonderful experiences. And now we are essentially launching the podcast called Portal 2195 in Chicago. And I can't wait, honestly.
Oh, wow. In the inventory of issues that women deal with, and men have a hard time empathizing with, which ones are especially galling in the experiences of yourself and your fellow female travelers? And how do you think that emotive gap can be narrowed or even closed?
So so there's so many issues that women will talk about. And I thought a lot about this question. I mean, I think a lot about this question. And I could say all the usual: empathy, listening, you know, rapey, you know, like a lot of things you could say. But I'm gonna zero in on one, which I think is super interesting. And because you're so interesting and you're so introspective about this, I wanna be interesting for you. So I'm gonna say one of my great pet peeves, because I'm a person who thinks, and I'm a person who's intellectual, and I'm a person who reads. My great pet peeve is when men don't listen to my opinion on politics. I find this incredible. They can be listening to me on almost any issue. They're either men I've dated, men I'm on a date with, men I've been in relationships with. But when I open my mouth to utter an opinion about what I think is going on politically, I don't mean like have a kind of allegiance to a party. I'm talking about an analysis. And this begins in college, where I took political science class, and I know a little bit about politics. Or I know a little bit about like countries, politics, because I came from Russia. I studied Russian history. I studied Russian civilization. I have a really deep knowledge of the political world that birthed the Russia that we see today. And so I was also taking a political science class. And I remember, you know, when the women were always afraid to raise their hands in the political science class, and we were always afraid to speak. And then when we did speak, I just remember the men after class saying things to us like, I know we're supposed to all be equal, but you guys are just like dumber when it comes to politics. And it was, and I remember like not even being insulted by this. I remember like agreeing, you know, like just kind of, it took me many, many years to understand and to accept that I had insight that is shareable and is interesting and should be listened to. And it takes a long time, you know, while a guy, even at a young age, is like, I think this, and this, and this, and this, and this, you know, whereas for a girl or a woman to speak in the political realm, in the political arena, takes guts, takes courage, and takes fear of what she'll be thought of. And maybe like, you know, one thing I always think about is like, I haven't memorized all the dates. You know, what if I don't remember the exact date that some Stalin was born in, you know, like maybe they'll think I'm dumb because of that. Right. So you infuse yourself. And I think that insecurity bleeds into the lack of equality in government, it globally. I think that insecurity and that feeling, it's both born by the culture, quietly taught to us by the culture, actually said to us by the people that we connect with, but also throughout like personal relationships. And obviously I've talked about this with other women who will say, you know, like when I am meeting with a bunch of women, we all talk politics and everyone has an opinion about what's happening in the political arena.
Right.
But you won't hear us engaging with men in the same way. And
So how do you close that emotive gap if there's no empathy for listening to a woman's opinion on politics?
I mean, I think you basically just said it, which is empathy, which is, I think empathy is huge in the connection between men and women. I think that when women get upset about what's going on with men, and when you read the statistics, they also, it's like, it's not fun to be a man today. And I'll tell you, I have enormous empathy. If I was a man and the Epstein files came out and I was a man during that period in my life, when this came out and it's all these men who are doing these terrible things, I would feel awful. And we have to empathize with the men who are not like these terrible, evil men. We have to help. We have to connect and collaborate. Like women have to connect and collaborate. In other words, the statement, I keep hearing this reel that keeps going that says, not all men, not all men. But then gives out statistics that show that so many men are doing this and that. And then there was another reel that was talking about like a spectrum. Mm-hmm. Like some men don't say anything about it. Some men are this. So I think, and this is why I made my movie, I'm very passionate about it. I want men to enter the conversation. I want men to talk about women's rights. I want men to utter the word feminism. I want men to step into our shoes in full. I want a guy to feel like I do when I used to try to talk about politics and no one would listen to her. And I even made a show called What If Men Wore Heels? And it was like a reality show when I went around New York City and interviewed a bunch of guys, bought giant shoes with heels and forced them to put those on. And it was the funnest, coolest thing I did because it was really hard for them to walk in the heels. And the heels became almost like they became like a empathetic bridge.
There you go.
They got to experience it. So I think that the bridge is empathy.
Excellent. Finally, since essentially Galaxy 360 is a comedy, how can laughing at ourselves and our absurd situation vis-a-vis men and women's interactions in the mating landscape help us to gain more understanding?
You just said it right before, which is empathy. Comedy, this is the way I think about it. I think that comedy is the passage to empathy. And unlike a demagogue who speaks at you and throws things at you, you can actually pursue, incredible political agendas through comedy. So, because you can, I call it comedy with a mission. Comedy with a mission is not comedy that's meant to demonize anyone. It's not comedy that's meant to embarrass other people, though, I do embarrass men in my movie. A comedy is like critique of society and social mores that is utterly and beautifully digestible. When you invite people to a comedic show, you're inviting them to laugh, you're inviting them to have fun, and then you sneak in a little message along the way. And it's honestly the coolest thing. It's the coolest thing is when you do it through comedy. So that's my kind of short answer.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2026.